Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the Benchwarmer Sports Podcast. Raffi here, joined by Davian as always. Davian, the NFL trade deadline is upon us. It's coming up next week. So, with that in mind, there's plenty to talk about. A lot of potential options, players getting moved. It feels like the trade deadline has become more enticing over the past couple of years. I remember a few years ago, it was just this practice squad player gets traded for a fifth round pick, or some old veteran gets traded for like a third. But ever since I think the Rams, I think were the big team who had the FTP mindset of just throw whatever picks, anything for a Super Bowl. Feels like more teams are a little more willing to trade picks come the NFL trade deadline. So we'll see what winds up happening. And are some intriguing names that we'll get into shortly. But before we do that, Davian, how are you? We're recording this Saturday, November 1st. Daylight savings is tomorrow. Don't get me started on daylight savings. Such a stupid idea. Such a stupid concept. Whoever came up with that, biggest stop. But speaking of November 1st, and it being November, World Series Game 7 is tonight. Davian, before we get into the NFL content, first, how are you? The first question. And second off, Game 7 of the World Series.
Yeah. First off, Raffi, I'm doing great. I mean, the Patriots are 6-2 now, right? We played the Falcons this weekend. A great game, I think, which hopefully we'll win. I think we will. When you're playing a QB his last name's Penix, I think that's a high possibility of winning. But besides that, I'm doing great, Raffi. Game 7, super excited about it. It's been what a whirlwind of a series. I mean, honestly, this might go down as one of the best series we've seen in the past few years, honestly. And the implications of this game couldn't be bigger. I mean, honestly, you have an American team basically going against a Canadian team. You have Shohei Ohtani trying to set his legacy, while you have the Blue Jays really trying to shock the world. And so I really think my prediction for this game is that this is Shohei Ohtani's legacy game. This is the game where the Dodgers really step up all across the board, including in their pitching. This is Clayton Kershaw's last game. I don't know if he's going to be pitching or not. I'm not very knowledgeable about that just yet. But I think it's going to be a great game no matter what. It's a Game 7. I mean, it's the two best words in the English language are Game 7, in all honesty. So, I'm just very excited. But, Raffi, how have you been? How are you feeling for Game 7? Or, I know that Hawks have been doing well. I know we're not talking about hockey today, but, I know you've been pretty pumped about that as well. So, how have you been?
Yeah, Hawks are still moving along. They lost 6-3 a few nights ago to the Winnipeg Jets in a game where I feel like every mistake you make wound up in the back of the net, which was brutal. And then you play against Connor Hellebuyck, too. You're not going to get more than 2 goals against them. They got 3, so we'll take it, although the first goal was definitely one of the flukier goals of the year so far. But yeah, Game 7 tonight. It's going to be a great game. I think the Blue Jays are going to pull it off. I mean, it seems like this entire postseason, they've always been ruled out. And we forget that they were one of the best teams in the MLB, the top team in the AL, and this team continuously, when you think that they're down, continues to bounce back. And the fact that they lost an 18-inning game to the Dodgers in Game 3 to go down 2-1 and proceeded to play games the night after and the night following and win both of those games to go up 3-2. Yes, they did lose Game 6, but I saw that game and said, whoever wins this game is likely just going to run away with the series. The other team, not only just you lose all your relievers for the most part, a lot of your pitching, but also it comes down to the mental fact of, oh my gosh, we were so close, we just lost an 18-inning game. Then you have to think about that, and then you have to get ready for the next game. It's hard to do that. At least I imagine it's hard to do that. I'm not an MLB pitcher or MLB player, obviously. But for how they bounce back so far this postseason, especially how they bounce back after Game 3, that adversity, I think that Toronto's going to get it done tonight. It's going to be definitely a great game. I'm really excited about it, and this World Series has been an absolute classic. I had a friend who went to Game 3. He told me it was unbelievable, so it's been great, and it's two teams where you have the Dodgers trying to go back-to-back, cement their legacy, as you mentioned, Shohei Ohtani trying to go back-to-back, and then on the other hand, too, you have a team like the Blue Jays who have had a really rocky past couple years. We all remember Vlad Guerrero Jr. saying, like, oh, this year's going to be a movie, and then everything just went to absolute manure. They've really bounced back, and they've really risen up this year, and I think it's going to be a great game regardless. So
Yeah.
that's going to be really fun. We'll see who ends up winning that, and I'm sure we'll discuss it and hit on it at least next week. to some extent. But let's get into the main contents of the podcast today, NFL trade deadline. And Davian, I want to start off. You mentioned the Falcons and Patriots facing off, so that's going to be a fun game because, as we know, I'm unfortunately a Falcons fan. You are a Patriots fan, so that'll be an interesting game. A little bit of rivalry between the two co-hosts. But I did want to start off with the quarterbacks. So it seems like there's two quarterbacks that have the possibility of being moved come this NFL trade deadline. We look at Kirk Cousins and Russell Wilson. I think out of the two, in all likelihood, Russell Wilson would like to get moved just because his salary is much lower. The Falcons would have to eat a lot of that Kirk Cousins contract. I don't know how many people would be even interested in Kirk Cousins. At least Russell Wilson has shown some flashes of still being a semi-decent quarterback. And with a team like the Bengals, who are still just out of the playoff mix, I wonder if the Bengals might potentially look at Russell Wilson and say, you know what, we're trying to hold on to things right now and potentially look to add him or maybe another team that could use a quarterback upgrade, or at least a backup quarterback looks to add him, because I think the Giants are fully on the Jackson Dart train, and I can't imagine really anyone picking up the Kirk Cousins contract as well. Maybe the Vikings pick up Russell Wilson too as a nice veteran backup to JJ McCarthy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that moving Kirk Cousins is, of course, much harder just because of his contract, like you mentioned. I definitely see Russell Wilson being moved. I don't know if the Bengals are really buyers in this scenario because they have Joe Flacco already that they traded for. But if it could happen, especially after this weekend, seeing what happens there. I'm just curious as to where they go, really, because I don't know if there's like really a team that kind of stands out in terms of needing a QB that badly, except for really the Bengals, at least off the top of my head. Raffi, if you had an ideal scenario for Russell Wilson to go to, where would it be?
I think the most ideal scenario would be the exact scenario that he came into this year, and that is where you have a really young quarterback, arguably a rookie quarterback in terms of experience, in the Minnesota Vikings. And JJ McCarthy, I think, is getting healthy now. Obviously, we saw Carson Wentz is going to be, unfortunately, out for the rest of the year. So you shore up that backup position. You add a guy like Russell Wilson, who, by all means, seems to have been okay with giving Jackson Dart the QB1 spot and has seemed to, at least from the outsider perspective, it doesn't look like it's created any chaos or any bad vibes from one to another. So I think if JJ McCarthy doesn't play well, then you still have a decent veteran that you can throw in Russell Wilson, who still has his deep ball, still is not the same Russell Wilson we've seen in the past, obviously, when he was with Seattle, which is understandable. He hasn't been on Seattle for several years now. But I do think it's at least a good safety option in case JJ McCarthy still needs a little bit more time. There's no need to rush him with an injury, especially an injury that's kept him out the past couple of weeks. So I think that would make the most sense in my mind. I do want to talk about the Bengals and get your ideas on the Bengals because, as you mentioned, they did add Joe Flacco. He is dealing with an injury, so that's why I said potentially they could look to add another quarterback potentially. But Davian, they have a lot of intriguing pieces. Trey Hendrickson, likely his final year with the Cincinnati Bengals. He's on the franchise tag this year. We'll see if he winds up being brought back next year. Obviously, there was a lot of contract dispute this past offseason where a lot of people expected him to get traded. You have Taylor Britt, corner of the Bengals as well, who we see a lot of teams that are going to be buyers. One of their big holes for a lot of these teams is corner, so he could be potentially a sought-after piece. And you have linebacker Logan Wilson as well, who's been a solid linebacker, is definitely a starter, definitely not one of the top 10 linebackers, but is in that average, like a solid average to slightly above average linebacker. This Bengals team is only a game and a half behind Pittsburgh for the lead in the division. The Ravens got back on track last week with a win versus the Bears. Lamar Jackson is now going to be fully healthy. Do you think the Bengals should buy or sell is essentially the big question. I think that's the team that, out of all the buyers and sellers, and we'll discuss some more buyers and sellers and who should buy, who should sell, I think the Bengals are the most intriguing team in my opinion. They could buy, but they also, I think, have a solid argument to also just sell off assets as well.
I mean, I think it really comes down to what happens this Sunday against the Bears, really, for the Bengals. I think if they lose this game, then you become sellers. If you win, you might still stay as buyers trying to shore up some pieces here and there. And that's where I see the world where it's like, yeah, you trade for somebody like Kirk Cousins or like Russell Wilson potentially to shore that up. Probably not so much Kirk Cousins given his contract, and especially the Bengals clearly don't want to pay players, so they definitely won't be paying someone like Big Kirko. But I definitely could see them becoming. I think it really depends this Sunday. I think it's too early to tell, but I think if they lose against the Bears, 100% become sellers. I mean, there's just no reason to I think you're just falling way too behind. The Lamar Jackson's back with the Ravens. They're gonna go on a storm. I mean, the Dolphins are terrible, but Lamar Jackson looks great as per usual. He's healthy again now, so it's weird to say the season's a wash because it's like they're like right there, like where they kind of are but kind of aren't. But it really depends on what happens this weekend. I mean, in all honesty, do you think this weekend really matters for them as much as I'm saying, Raffi, or are you of different opinion that they should continue to be looking at to be sellers, especially with trading someone like Trey Hendrickson potentially?
I think if you don't have any plan going forward to pay Hendrickson, I think now would be the best time to move him, just before you get into the whole situation of franchise tagging a player. You could always do the tag and trade, but I think it's also more enticing for a team if they're able to acquire him and then they have more time to negotiate a contract extension with Trey Hendrickson. I think that is more enticing. You have him for essentially just over half a season, and then you have that half a season and then also some time in the off season to, worst case scenario, you can franchise tag him again. But you have the option, you have plenty of time to even consider about an extension. We saw the Bears trade for Sweat a couple years back, then they wound up extending him in the offseason right before free agency opened up. So I think it makes sense for a lot of teams, especially teams that really could use an edge rusher. Someone like Indianapolis, Dallas could use an edge rusher, a really good edge rusher. If only they had one in their system already, but that's preposterous. Obviously, they need one. The Cowboys, if they're still fighting it, that could be an interesting team. Steelers could potentially be an interesting option. You put him alongside TJ Watt, although would the Cincinnati Bengals entertain trading him to a division rival? Probably not. But I think it would make sense for the Bengals to sell just because Joe Burrow is not going to be back until likely week 16. He's your franchise quarterback, and why really rush him at this point? You don't want something to be lingering on into next year, which is really disappointing because this really felt like the all-in year for the Bengals. They brought back Trey Hendrickson for a year. Really felt like that was kind of it with this whole saga, is they were going to ride it out with the franchise tag this year, and then they were going to look to move him this upcoming offseason. And you see Burrow, Higgins, Chase, those contracts are just going to get more and more expensive, and they're just going to keep losing more cap space. So this really felt like the big year for the Bengals to go all in, and unfortunately I think it would be in their best interest to sell and then try to recuperate something for next year.
That's fair. I mean, I think the one thing I will say about Trey Hendrickson, I think the Patriots could be buyers. The Patriots are just buyers in general. I mean, we'll get more into it, but I think that given the amount of cap space that they have and assets that they have in terms of draft picks, I think I could really see them being buyers here. I think more so on the offensive side than defensive side, but I could see them picking up somebody like Trey Hendrickson, given their cap space and given the fact that they will probably be able to negotiate a long-term contract with him. I also see the Lions potentially. I mean, the Lions' pressure rate has really fallen. Yes, they have Aiden Hutchinson, who's absolute beast, but their pressure rate is only 9th in the NFL, and they're 7th in sacks. So, in that sense, I could see the Lions just deciding, hey, we're all in this year, right? Let's go get our guy in Trey Hendrickson, or get another guy. But I think that's enough about the Bengals to really be said. Raffi, another team that is probably gonna be sellers are the Saints, right? I mean, they're starting Tower Truck this week, so the Spencer Rattler train has seemed to die down. This is a team where they have a decent amount of assets to be able to be traded, specifically in Chris Olave. Raffi, do you agree with me that the Saints are sellers? And 2, where do you think Chris Olave goes, if he goes anywhere?
Yeah, the Saints are definitely sellers.
Yeah. Okay.
They're 1-7.
I don't know. Maybe
unless Tyler Shaw buy. They can run the table.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen this year. No, not. Unfortunately, the Pope is a Bears fan, so there's definitely no hope for the Saints this year. And I know people are talking about Chris Olave, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense to trade a guy like him just because he's still really young. I think he's like 26 years old. Yes, there's the concussions thing. But this year, he's been really solid. And Spencer Rattler, for not being a fantastic quarterback, at least isn't Derek Carr last year, who kept just delivering hospital balls to Chris Olave. And just Sorry, I took Chris Olave in the second round last year in my fantasy draft. That was a whole conundrum for me. But he's been healthy this year. which is, I think, a really big thing for him as a whole, especially just from the personal side, because he's just had so many concussions the past couple of years. But I just think that the Saints are a team. I'd like to see what Tyler Shuck looks like. And I want to see, I think this year you have Moore from Oregon, you have Mendoza from Indiana, you have Simpson from Alabama. I think there's a couple of solid quarterbacks that are going to be in this upcoming draft. So I'd like to see the Saints ride out with Shuck, see what they have. And if he's not that great and they wind up with a top pick to take one of those quarterbacks, I think you entertain taking a quarterback. And then it would make no sense for me to trade a wide receiver 1 when healthy in Chris Olave, albeit not a top 10 wide receiver, but a top 15 wide receiver in the NFL, I'd say, and then immediately turn around after drafting a franchise quarterback and saying, you know what we could really use a young top 15 wide receiver for this quarterback to throw to. So I don't think it makes much sense for the Saints to trade Chris Olave. I think, from what I read, they're looking to extend him. I think that makes the most sense. I do think that a guy like Rashid Shaheed, Brandon Cooks, those are definitely options. Shaheed, deep threat option. He's on an expiring contract this year, and he's 28 years old, I want to say. And that guy, could you imagine him on the Kansas City Chiefs? You already have Rashee Rice. You already have Worthy. The Bills as well could really use a deep threat as well. So I think Shaheed would be a sought-after player who I can certainly see getting moved, but I just can't see it with the Chris Olave being moved concept. It just makes no sense to me from a logistical standpoint of, if you draft a young quarterback, you want a solid wide receiver, but you just traded them last year for what? Like, we've seen the values of players after they get drafted. He is not good enough to get a ton of value. So are you going to take a 3rd round pick or 2nd round pick for Chris Olave when it's like,
you could though.
Oh my gosh, this box could be anything. This, like, if we give up this boat, we get this mystery box, and this mystery box could be anything. It could even be a boat.
But
it's
also
like
at
that
the
same
time,
concept.
they could get like really good value from Chris Olave from some teams that are really looking for a star wide receiver. That's the thing. So
if you're getting a 1st round pick, I would.
Yeah, I don't know if they'll get a 1st round pick.
If it's not a 1st round pick, I wouldn't consider it in my mind. It just wouldn't make sense.
I think the Saints would take it if the 1st round pick is offered, but I don't think a 1st round pick would be offered. Like, we've never seen. Yeah,
I agree. That's what I'm saying.
Like you said, I do think that, like, player value does depreciate after they get drafted, to an extent. I just don't know. Yes, I see the vision of extending him and keeping him for the future, but I also think that what is the Saints' future? Like, who is going to be that next quarterback? Like, I get you want to keep the pieces around, build more pieces around so you bring in a quarterback that can, fit into a good system, but I don't know what that system is, Raffi. I look at the Saints team and it's not dysfunctional, but it's just bad all around. I don't know. Like, their defense is like somewhat good, but the offense just sucks outside of like Chris Olave, and Kamara's already getting old at this point.
Yeah, Kamara's definitely had a bad year this year. It doesn't look like it looks like he's just going to be a franchise Saint, which I can completely understand and respect. But again, if Chris Olave was, and it's ridiculous to say this because it's really a matter of a couple years, but if he was 27, 28 years old with an expiring contract, then I'd say,
he's not even on an
probably
expiring contract.
When's the next time the Saints are going to be good? Like, if you hit on your franchise quarterback, then within like the next 2-3 years, okay, then he's in his 30s. Okay, that's kind of ridiculous to be like. Yes, it's good for the first couple of years, but by the time you're really like hitting your ascent, he's going to be on the wrong side of 30. Right now, if you take a quarterback and you hit on-site quarterback in this upcoming NFL draft, it takes 2-3 years. He's 27, 28 years old. He's still going to be a really solid wide receiver at that point. He's not going to even be 30 years old yet. So personally, I just don't see it. It doesn't make too much sense for me in my mind. Let's move over to another team that's also a seller, also a one-win team, just winning this past weekend, the New York Jets. And they have a young player that I'm intrigued to hear your thoughts on. That's Breece Hall, Davian. Do you think Breece Hall could potentially get moved? I think a couple teams, the Kansas City Chiefs, I know it's easy to just say the Chiefs, but Pacheco's been hurt often this season. He's been out. He obviously missed a lot of time last year I believe he broke his fibula, if I remember correctly. And he hasn't really been explosive this year. I think adding Breece Hall has been fantastic for a couple of years in his career. He's certainly had his bright spots. Do you think Breece Hall getting traded makes any sense for the Jets? I think the conversation, in my personal opinion, changes a little bit from a wide receiver to a running back if with a team looking to add a young quarterback in the future. So what are your thoughts on him? I think obviously you keep Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner. You just extended both of them. They're both young core pieces. But I think Breece Hall he hasn't had a fantastic year this year, and I wouldn't be shocked if the Jets at least entertained potentially trading him rather than paying him, because we know running back values and paying running backs has always been a big discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, he played amazing against the Bengals. That's the thing. So it made things much harder, I think, for the Jets in terms of, do we really trade this guy who just really just like was so explosive, such a key part of this offense, clearly as seen in the last game. And the issue is that if your plans are to bring in a new QB like Mendoza or whoever goes in the first, in the top 5, because that is where the Jets are most likely going to land. I don't know if I think you need a core running back with that. Like, you want your rookie QB to have someone there, to hand the ball off to. I think that time and time again we've seen that be kind of very helpful and successful for a lot of QBs. That said, though, if a team comes calling and tells the Jets, "Hey, second round pick for Breece Hall," you're taking that. You absolutely are, because what we've seen year over year is that there are a lot of running backs that come through the draft, and they're very good. They're either very agile and versatile, or they're just these kind of like run through a wall, Cam Scatterbo like players, right? So I that's the thing with running backs, their value is much less because they're so replaceable almost. Because at the end of the day, a running back can fit into the system much easier than a wide receiver can, I think. So do they trade them? Yes, but only if it's like a second round pick. I think that I really see them looking to extend him, especially after last week's game.
Yeah, he's had some solid weeks. He had 113 yards on 14 carries versus Dallas early October, and at the end of the month in September 29th versus the Dolphins, he had 14 carries for 81 yards, and obviously much Bengals game. This past week where he really balled out, so I can certainly see it. Again, it's always the mindset of running backs are kind of pretty. You don't really want to give him a second contract. He is only 24 years old, so he's definitely not up there in age. And if I call him up there in age, I'm essentially going to be up there in age because I'm just a year younger than him. So I'll remove myself from the unk conversation. But I think the Jets, you look at some of their matchups, they lost to the Broncos by 4. They lost a lot of games by 1 score. They lost to the Carolina Panthers 13-6 a few weeks ago. They lost to the Dolphins 27-21. So I don't think it's too far-fetched if they really do hit on a quarterback in this upcoming NFL draft. I do think, for the most part, they are young enough and have a solid core where I think that they would be putting in out of all the teams right now that are at the bottom, I think the Jets, which is hilarious to say this, I think the Jets are the best positioned to provide good support for that quarterback going forward, that rookie quarterback. If that quarterback is a hit, which it's the Jets, I think they could be well set up to, at least for the Jets, to have a much better year next year. So I can certainly see the idea, but again, too, I completely agree. If you're getting a second round pick for him, you can get a Breece Hall in the second round this upcoming year, especially because he was taken in the second round. And that was the year where I believe Jonathan Taylor was taken. Yeah. Numerous other really solid running backs taken in that range. So I don't see... If the Jets get a second, third round pick, I think a day 2 pick would suffice, and then you can use that pick immediately just to get another running back.
Just to close out on the Jets too, I see players like Jermaine Johnson and Michael Clemens potentially also being traded, but also again for high value. I think that the Jets are a very young team. It's very hard to trade young players when you're trying to build up a system, build up a culture. So in that sense, I think because Jermaine Johnson's been playing great for the Jets, but again, second round pick. That's what they're seeking. That's what they say. That's something where you're willing to do that. But in any case, Raffi, anything else to be said about the Jets, or are we moving on to a lovely team down in Miami?
Yeah, let's move over to the lovely team down in Miami, which has similar weather to New York. Davian, I know as a native New Yorker, you can certainly say that the weather is
100%.
Pretty similar
between it's like sunny 80 degrees outside right now. Yeah,
Miami, Florida.
Can't wait to go outside and tan.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So bad. The weather's so...
But yeah, so the Dolphins, also another one-win team. I think we both are in agreement that they're certainly sellers. They fired Greer, their head coach or their general manager, apologies about that. A few days ago, I believe it was right after losing to the Ravens on Thursday, so it was Friday where he got fired. Mike McDaniel, likely a sitting duck at this point, will likely get fired
I don't
at
think
the end
so,
of the
Rob.
season. Just
I actually don't think so.
You bring in a new. I just see the trend says when there's a new GM, typically they want their head coach selection, or they want to have that pick of a head coach. So for that reason, I think it would make. I think we would see Mike McDaniel.
I see that the Dolphins still value him, and that's why they haven't fired him. But they got rid of their GM because their old GM, whatever he's irrelevant now, wasn't open to selling. Is reportedly the news that he wasn't willing to trade Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips, Matthew Judon, Jalen Waddle, even potentially. And so now you bring it, or Minkah Fitzpatrick. I think we'll really talk about him. I think you have so many players that they could sell and really build up a lot of draft stock. And I think that what you have is you have a culture that Daniels has set up, which good or bad, you can argue about that. I mean, there's always finger pointing in that locker room, finger pointing at Tua finger pointing at everybody else. I think Tua's basically gone. We could talk. We could agree on that almost. But I could really see them being big sellers, and they have so many players they could easily sell for very, very high value. And so, Raffi, I think to start off, someone like Jalen Phillips, I think, would need at least a third round pick for them to be able to trade. And I think that the similar scenario is also for Bradley Chubb, where you have these two really good. These are pieces on the defense that a team like the Lions or a team like the Cowboys, if they trade for them, it could really be a huge, huge factor, huge game-changing piece for them. And I think that the Dolphins will recognize that, and they're not going to go cheap when they're selling. So, Raffi, what do you think about that, especially those defensive pieces? I know Minkah Fitzpatrick as well is somebody that will probably be on the move. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Fitzpatrick and Judon are the top two guys in my mind, just because they are on the other side of 30. I believe Fitzpatrick is 30 plus at this point, so I think both of them are likely move them. As for Tua, even if the Dolphins wanted to move on from him, this upcoming season, just cutting him straight up has a dead cap hit of $99 million. So I think they have to hold him at least for next year, and then they can entertain it where it's a slightly better $32 million in the 2027 season to release him. So I do think the Dolphins are stuck with him for another year, although with a high draft pick, you can certainly take a quarterback and just have them sit behind Tua for a year, which hopefully they learn how to throw a ball from watching Tua, and I mean that unfortunately in a kind of rude way. But I think those two players make the most sense. I think Bradley Chubb also, I believe, is 28, 29 years old. He's been a solid player this year for the Dolphins, so I think that would also make a lot of sense for them to likely move on from him for likely a day 2 pick as well. So I think for the Dolphins, it's time to sell. You don't need to go overblown and just start selling all these players. Tyreek Hill, if he was healthy, would have certainly been a player that I think that some teams would certainly be interested in. Over 30 years old, likely done with the team as we saw, but he's unfortunately out for the year. I don't think Waddle makes too much sense. Again, I think Waddle, for his age, I think it's best to hold him. Chain, I'd hold on him. Jalen Phillips, if they aren't interested in paying him, I can certainly see he's 26, 27 years old. He has a lot of injury problems, so if you don't want to really pay him, then I can understand potentially moving on from him too. So I think the Dolphins will likely move a lot of their defensive players overall over the next week, in my personal opinion. I think that makes the most sense.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, honestly, I think they're bigger sellers than you're making them out to be, but I guess we'll see what happens. I think if they get good offers, they're going to go after it. But especially now that they got rid of the GM, bringing in a new GM, someone who, giving that new GM a bunch of picks to work with, I think would be huge, and you can really help build around Tua, especially given his contract. I take back what I said earlier. But any case,
One sec, I will say real quick, just before we wrap up and before you give some final thoughts, the Dolphins, I will say, the timing of firing Greer, I think really does not do this new GM who's stepping in any favors. Yes, they're obviously a part of the organization, so they have somewhat of a gist of everything already. They've likely been on a lot of these calls with other teams about these players, but to step up, and you essentially, by the time Greer got fired, you have less than a week until the NFL trade deadline. I really think that's if the Dolphins are quiet, I think that's a big reason why there wasn't enough time between the transition between firing Greer and the other guy stepping.
Yeah, but
in my personal opinion, I don't know how this all works.
I agree with that. I see that theory.
I think it's a
point. But the thing is that like they're not buyers; they're sellers. Teams are calling them. So in that sense, like it's pretty easy when you're sitting back on and just taking calls left and right. Granted, though, yes, he definitely, this new GM, whoever they appoint as interim GM, definitely doesn't have those connections to really be able to make good value trades. He doesn't have those connections with the GMs, which we know are huge factors. I mean, based off the movies I've watched.
I mean, other GMs are going to be smelling blood in the water at this point, and it's going to do no benefits to this GM who's stepping in. But anyways, Davian, any other thoughts? Any buyers, sellers you wanted to say?
I think we'll just, I think we could quickly go through some. So other sellers are the Titans. I think especially in terms of their edge players, Arden Key and Draymond Jones. I could see them potentially selling them. The only issue is that, because they said they're willing to virtually trade anyone besides Cam Ward and Jeffrey Simmons. That is the words of apparently coming out of the Titans organization. But at the same time, it's very hard to do that. Other players, I mean, I can see the Raiders potentially have, they have Eric Stokes, Michael Mayer as a tight end as well. Potentially
Jacoby Myers as well.
Yeah, Jacoby Myers as well is a huge. So, I mean, look, teams looking to buy are the Lions, Ravens, Commanders, really for edge rush. Secondary help, of course, are the Vikings and Colts. Running back, definitely the Chiefs. Defensive tackle, probably the Bills. They're really in the market of, I think, like really trying to beef up that defensive line. And the Chiefs, of course. Other buyers, Pats. I really, really think that the Pats need to go all in right now. I think they could really bring in some good pieces with the cap space that they have. And I could ramble on about there's so many players that are out there that I think that they could buy on. Every single player that we mentioned throughout this podcast, Raffi, I think the Patriots could be potentially interested in. In all honesty, this is a different team. This is a new culture. They want to bring in pieces. They want to build around Drake May. Most at the same time, Mike Vrabel, he's a defensive-minded coach. He wants to build up this defense. So, we just sold Keon White. We just sold Kyle Duggar. Getting rid of those contracts are probably huge. Opens up some space. Not the biggest fan of the Keon White trade. I wish we got more value out of him, but it is what it is.
And the big thing, too, for the Patriots is it feels like they've been in on absolutely everything over the past year. Yeah. And part of that is because they have so much cap space. And now with Drake May looking like a franchise quarterback, and especially when the Patriots have been good. You need to beat the teams on your schedule. That's the big thing. But you look at their current schedule, their current schedule, they had a lot of beatable teams to start the year. They have a lot of beatable teams to end the year. This is a great year for the Patriots to really make a push because you got to push against the Bills.
Very good in the sense that
exactly. There's no reason why the Patriots can't be one of the top teams in the AFC by the end of the season. And again, with so much cap space, I think it's time for the Patriots, to start to look to buy. I will say the Cowboys are an interesting team. They aren't really out of the mix yet. I'm a little. Before we end the show, Davian, real quick, do you think the Patriots? Do you think the Cowboys should be buyers or sellers? Because I personally think that they should hold on their guys. I really don't think they have too many guys that could potentially get moved. And Dak Prescott's been balling out this year. CeeDee Lamb's been really good when healthy. And I think for the Cowboys, it makes more sense kind of to ride it out or potentially look to add a piece or two that they could potentially extend for future years than to sell off assets.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think they need to add a piece or two, and realistically, I mean, I look at their schedule. It's not the worst, right? They have Cardinals, Raiders coming up, but then you hit the Eagles, Chiefs, Cowboys. Like those are tough teams, and then you still got to play the Commanders again later on in the year. So I think if I'm the Cowboys, if I can get someone that I can make a long-term piece, like Trey Hendrickson, I'm going after that. But what we say is not what's going to happen in Jerry World, because Jerry World operates sometimes delusionally. Sometimes it's very good. I mean, we've seen Jerry Jones historically make some crazy trades, and it's worked out. The Parsons trade, Parsons maybe isn't playing phenomenally on the Packers, but I still think that they should have paid him. I think that he really fit in the Cowboys system, and I think that was a huge mistake. But any case, I could see them being buyers, but what I say is what I see on the paper. It's not what Jerry Jones is thinking. I mean, Rafi, what do you think? Because it's really hard to judge this Cowboys team about what they will do versus what they should do.
Yeah, I think they're going to hold, if not potentially look to add a guy like Hendrickson. I think that makes the most sense just because Jerry Jones, even after making the Micah Parsons trade, mentioned, oh, we can use these picks to really shore up the defense. And it's like, bro, you just traded that piece. You could have instead of having the picks, you had the player. But anyways, I think Hendrickson does make a lot of sense for the Cowboys. But knowing Jerry Jones, he's going to trade for Brandon Cooks for a 7th-round pick and then proclaim the Cowboys being back. So we'll see what winds up happening. It'll certainly be interesting, and we'll be sure to talk a lot about this next week once the trade deadline is completed. But that'll do for this edition of the Benchwarmer Sports Podcast. Let us know in the comments below about teams that you think are buyers, sellers, who could potentially get moved and for what. Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to see that. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and as always, follow us on TikTok as well, Benchwarmer_sports. For Davian, I'm Raffi. We hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a good one. See ya.
Peace.